The human cadets presented their plan to Commander Torres and the alien defense staff in the main conference room, a vast chamber that had once hosted diplomatic meetings between species who now fought and died together. The walls were lined with the flags of a dozen worlds, but most of those worlds had fallen to the Morthic Empire decades ago, leaving only these faded banners as monuments to the dead. Lewis stood at the front of the room, his young face serious as he outlined their strategy to the assembled officers. Behind him, the tactical display showed the Morthic fleet in all its terrible glory, 400 bioships arranged in perfect formation around the planet. To the alien officers, it looked like an impenetrable wall of death. To the humans, it looked like a target. You want to take 200 cadets and attack a fleet of 400 warships? General Vorth asked, his Kelthoran mandibles clicking in what passed for disbelief among his species. This is not how civilized warfare is conducted. This is not how rational beings solve problems. The alien officers exchanged glances that clearly conveyed their skepticism. They had been fighting this war for over a century, and they had learned to think in terms of months and years, not minutes and hours. The idea of ending a siege in a single assault was so far outside their experience that they could barely comprehend it, but Commander Torres, who had studied human military history during his years at the Academy, recognized something familiar in their approach. These were not the tactics of a species that had learned warfare from textbooks. These were the instincts of predators who had clawed their way to the top of a hostile food chain. "Explain your reasoning," Torres said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded battles across a dozen star systems. "Show us how you intend to accomplish what we have failed to do for over a century." Lewis activated the holographic display, zooming in on the enemy formation. "The Morthic fleet maintains perfect discipline," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "They follow precise patrol routes, maintain exact spacing, and conduct routine maintenance on a fixed schedule. They have turned siege warfare into a science." He highlighted specific sections of the enemy fleet, pointing out patterns that the alien officers had seen but not truly understood. Every 37 minutes, they cycle their bioships through system checks. During this time, their attention is focused inward, not outward. Their command vessels are vulnerable. Cadet Rivers stepped forward, her pale skin bearing the scars of Europa's ice storms. "We have identified the exact timing of their maintenance window," she said. "For exactly 37 seconds, their formation becomes unstable. Their command ships are distracted by internal diagnostics. Their defensive systems are operating at reduced capacity." The alien officers studied the display with growing amazement. They had been watching the enemy for over a century, but they had never seen what the humans saw. They had been thinking like defenders, not like hunters. They had been looking for ways to survive, not ways to kill. "You propose to attack during this window?" asked Lieutenant Kix, his forearms gesturing at the display. "To coordinate an assault on multiple targets simultaneously? The precision required would be impossible. No species has reflexes fast enough to execute such a plan." Lewis smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the alien officers suddenly remember that humans came from a world where everything was trying to kill them. "No civilized species has those reflexes," he said. "But we are not civilized. We are Deathworlders." The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. The cadets had identified every fighter craft and assault ship in the stations. Hangar bays, even the ones that had been written off as too damaged to fly. They intended to launch everything at once, coordinating their attack to hit the enemy command vessels during the brief maintenance window, while the alien defenders had spent decades trying to outlast the siege. The humans planned to end it in a single decisive blow. They would not try to destroy the entire fleet. That would be impossible. Instead, they would cut off the head of the snake, eliminating the command structure that held the formation together. "The bioships are living creatures," explained Cadet Knox, who had learned to hunt the acid-breathing predators of Venus. "They follow a pack mentality, taking orders from alpha vessels. If we can kill the alphas, the rest of the fleet will scatter." The alien officers argued that the plan was too risky, that civilized warfare did not work this way. They spoke of acceptable losses, of strategic withdrawal, of the wisdom of fighting another day. But the humans had grown up in environments where there was no such thing as fighting another day, there was only winning or dying. "You are asking us to gamble everything on a single attack," General Vorth said, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "If you fail, the station will be defenseless. The enemy will destroy us all," Lewis nodded calmly. "Yes," he said. "But if we succeed, the siege ends today. You have been fighting this war for over a century. We are offering to end it in 20 minutes. The room fell silent as the alien officers contemplated the magnitude of what the humans were proposing. They had been trained in the art of war, but this was something different. This was not warfare as they understood it. This was the kind of calculated violence that came from a species that had learned to kill or be killed. "Commander," Torres studied the tactical display, his mind racing through the implications of the human plan. He had seen these cadets arrive just hours ago, young and untested, seemingly unprepared for the horror of siege warfare. But now he was beginning to understand that they were not unprepared. They were just prepared for a different kind of war. "The coordination required would be unprecedented," Torres said slowly. "You would need to pilot your craft through the enemy defensive grid while maintaining perfect formation. The timing would have to be exact to the second. The slightest error would result in total failure." Lewis smiled again, and this time the alien officers could see the predator that lurked beneath the human civilized exterior. "Commander," he said, "we grew up on worlds where the slightest error meant death. We learned to be precise because precision was survival. We learned to coordinate because teamwork was life." The debate continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable. The alien officers had run out of options, and the humans were offering the only plan that had any chance of success. It was insane, impossible, and completely contrary to everything they had learned about warfare. But it was also the only hope they had left. The siege of Valdris Prime was about to enter its final phase, and for the first time in over a century, the defenders were going to attack. The fortress world of Valdris Prime hung in space like a broken jewel, its crystalline spires reaching toward the stars, while enemy ships surrounded it like hungry wolves. For 103 years, the Morthic Empire had kept their fleet in orbit around the planet, raining death from above while the defenders huddled behind weakening shields. What had once been a proud military academy now served as humanity's last desperate foothold in the Outer Rim. Commander Torres stood in the war room, his weathered face lit by the red glow of warning lights that never seemed to stop flashing. The holographic display showed the truth that everyone already knew but nobody wanted to say out loud: they were losing. The Morthic fleet had grown to over 400 vessels, their biomechanical ships pulsing with alien menace as they maintained their stranglehold on the system. Each ship was a living thing, bred for war, covered in thick armor that could heal itself and armed with weapons that spat acid and fire, the shields around. Valdris Prime flickered like dying candles. The massive generators that powered them had been running for over a century, pushed far beyond their designed limits. Every few hours, another section would fail, and the defenders would scramble to reroute power from somewhere else. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul, and everyone knew it could not last much longer. In the depths of the station, 50,000 defenders from a dozen different species prepared for what they all believed would be their final battle. The Althorians checked their plasma rifles with methodical precision, their forearms moving in perfect coordination. The Keltheron warriors sharpened their ceremonial blades. Even though they knew such weapons would be useless against the bioships above, the Vorthic engineers worked frantically to keep the power flowing, their tentacles dancing over control panels with desperate efficiency. They had been fighting this war for so long that some of the younger defenders had been born on the station. They had never known a world without the constant threat of death from above, never experienced the simple pleasure of looking up at an empty sky. The siege had become their entire reality, a grinding war of attrition that wore down both body and spirit, The other species in the Galactic Federation had long since written off Valdris Prime. They sent their thoughts and prayers, but no ships, no reinforcements, no hope. The civilized races of the galaxy had learned long ago that some battles could not be won, only endured. They believed in strategic withdrawal, in fighting another day, in the wisdom of knowing when to retreat. But then something impossible happened. A transport ship slipped through the blockade, its hull scarred by plasma fire and its engines smoking from the desperate run through enemy lines. It was a miracle that it had made it through it all, given the wall of death that surrounded the planet. The ship limped into the docking bay like a wounded animal seeking shelter. From its cargo hold emerged 200 cadets from the Terran Military Academy. They were young, fresh-faced humans who had volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. They wore the simple gray uniforms of military students, their faces bright with the kind of enthusiasm that only came from those who had never seen real war. The alien defenders watched with a mixture of pity and bewilderment as the human cadets disembarked. Lieutenant Kix, a veteran Althorian warrior who had been fighting the siege for 30 years, shook his head at the sight of these soft-looking bipeds. To the galaxy's more civilized species, humans were still relative newcomers, Deathworlders from a savage planet who had somehow stumbled into space travel. "Look at them," Kix muttered to his companion, a grizzled Keltheran sergeant named Vorth. "They think they can make a difference. They have no idea what they have walked into." The humans did indeed look out of place among the battle-hardened defenders. They were smaller than the Althorians, less armored than the Keltherons, and completely lacking the natural weapons that most species had evolved. They seemed almost fragile, with their thin skin and soft bodies. Many of the alien defenders wondered why such a weak species had been allowed to join the Galactic Federation at all. But there was something in their eyes that the aliens did not recognize. It was not the resignation of soldiers who had fought too long or the desperation of those who knew they were going to die. It was something else entirely, a calm confidence that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. Commander Torres briefed the mixed group of defenders on their grim situation. The holographic display showed the Morthic fleet in all its terrible glory, 400 bioships arranged in perfect formation around the planet. Each ship was a work of art in its own horrific way, grown rather than built, shaped by generations of genetic engineering into the perfect siege weapon. "The enemy has been refining their tactics for over a century," Torres explained, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "They do not rush, they do not take unnecessary risks. They simply wait and fire and wait some more. Our shields are failing. Our weapons are running low on power. Our food supplies will last perhaps another month." The alien defenders nodded grimly. They had heard this briefing many times before, with only the numbers changing. The Morthic Empire had perfected siege warfare over millennia, slowly grinding down their enemies through attrition. They were patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless. They would wait for years if necessary, slowly tightening their grip until their enemies had no choice but to surrender. "Their latest assault has breached the outer defenses," Torres continued. "Conventional wisdom suggests we have perhaps days before total collapse. We will make our final stand here in the heart of the station. We will sell our lives dearly, but we will not surrender." The human cadets listened intently, their expressions growing more determined with each tactical update. They studied the display with the kind of focused attention that their instructors back on Earth would have recognized. These were not the faces of students who had given up. These were the faces of predators who had found their prey. As the briefing ended and the defenders dispersed to their positions, the humans gathered in a tight group. They spoke in low voices, their words too quiet for the aliens to hear. But there was something in their body language that suggested they were not preparing to die. They were preparing to fight. The siege of Valdris Prime had lasted for 103 years. In a few hours it would be over. While the alien defenders prepared for another day of defensive warfare, Cadet Lewis gathered his fellow humans in an abandoned training facility deep in the station's lower levels. The room had once been used to teach young officers the finer points of tactical theory, but now it served as a gathering place for 200 humans who had very different ideas about how wars should be fought. Lewis was not the oldest of the cadets, nor was he the highest ranking, but he had something that the others recognized and respected. He had grown up in the slums of Mars Colony, where creative problem-solving meant the difference between eating and starving, between living and dying. He had learned to fight before he could properly walk, and he had learned to think like a predator before he understood what civilization meant. "Listen up," Lewis said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from leading gang fights in the Martian underground. "These aliens have been playing defense for over a century. They have been trying to outlast the enemy, to endure until help arrives, to survive until tomorrow. But we are not aliens. We are humans, and humans do not just survive, we win." Around him, 199 other cadets nodded in agreement. They came from all corners of human space, from the ice mines of Europa to the burning deserts of Mercury Station. They had grown up in environments that would kill most galactic species within hours, and they had learned to thrive in places where mere survival was considered an achievement. The group began analyzing the siege from a completely different perspective. While the alien defenders focused on shield strength and defensive positions, the humans began looking for weaknesses in the enemy formation. They studied the Morthic fleet not as an insurmountable obstacle, but as a problem to be solved. Cadet Rivers, who had survived the ice storms of Europa where the wind could freeze exposed flesh in seconds, was the first to notice something important. "Look at their formation," she said, pointing to the tactical display. "It is too perfect. They maintain exact spacing, precise timing, identical patrol routes. They have been doing this for so long that it has become routine." The other cadets gathered around the display, their Deathworld-trained eyes picking out details that the alien defenders had missed. They had grown up in environments where patterns meant life or death, where recognizing the subtle signs of change could mean the difference between being eaten and eating. Cadet Knox, who had been raised in the acid rain stations of Venus where a single equipment failure could dissolve a man in minutes, pointed to the enemy maintenance cycles. "Look here," he said, tracing lines on the display. "Every 37 minutes, they cycle their bioships through system checks. During that time, their attention is focused inward, not outward. They are vulnerable." The humans worked through the night, their minds racing as they calculated variables that the galaxy's more civilized species would never have considered. They had learned to think like hunters, to see prey where others saw only predators. The concept of a century-long siege was alien to their survival-focused mindset, while the alien defenders slept fitfully in their bunks, dreaming of homeworlds they would never see again. The humans pored over tactical data with the intensity of students cramming for a final exam. But this was not academic study. This was the kind of focused analysis that came from a species that had learned to kill, or be killed. They identified every weakness in the Morthic formation, every gap in their defenses, every moment when their guard was down. They studied the bioships like biologists studying a new species, looking for soft spots and vital organs. They analyzed the enemy's communication patterns, their supply lines, their command structure. What they found was a fleet that had become complacent. The Morthic Empire had been conducting sieges for thousands of years, and they had perfected the art of slow, methodical warfare. They were patient, disciplined, and utterly confident in their ability to outlast any enemy. They had never faced an opponent that was willing to risk everything on a single, desperate gambit. By dawn, the humans had developed a plan that would have been dismissed as suicidal by any military academy in the galaxy. It relied on speed, coordination, and the kind of reckless courage that only came from a species that had evolved on a world trying to kill them every day. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Instead of trying to outlast the siege, they would end it. Instead of playing defense, they would attack. Instead of waiting for the enemy to make a mistake, they would force the enemy to react to them. They would use the enemy's own routine against them. During the 37-minute maintenance window, when the bioships were focused on internal systems, the humans would strike. They would take every available fighter craft and assault ship and throw them at the enemy in a coordinated attack designed to destroy the command structure of the fleet. It was the kind of plan that could only come from a species that had never learned to accept defeat. The humans had grown up in environments where there was no such thing as a fair fight, where victory went to whoever was willing to pay the highest price. They had learned to gamble everything on a single moment, to risk total destruction for the chance of total victory. The station's lights began to flicker with the dawn cycle. The humans finished their preparations. They had studied the enemy, analyzed their weaknesses, and developed a plan of attack. Now all that remained was to convince the alien defenders that 200 cadets could accomplish what 50,000 veterans had failed to do in over a century. The aliens would call it madness. The humans called it war. Lewis looked around at his fellow cadets, seeing the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. They were young, inexperienced, and facing impossible odds. But they were human, and humans did not know how to quit. "Remember," he said, as they prepared to present their plan to the command staff, "we are not here to die with honor. We are here to win. And if we have to break every rule of civilized warfare to do it, then that is exactly what we will do." The cadets nodded, their faces set with the kind of grim determination that had carried their species from the caves of Earth to the stars. They were about to teach the galaxy what it meant to fight like a human. The siege was about to end one way or another. The assault began at exactly 800 hours ship time. The massive hangar doors of Valdris Prime opened like the jaws of some ancient beast, and from within poured a stream of fighters and assault ships that had been hidden in the station's depths for over a century. 200 human cadets launched into the void, their small craft screaming through the defensive grid with a precision that stunned the watching aliens. Lewis led the first wave, his fighter dancing through enemy plasma fire with the kind of instinctive grace that came from dodging Martian dust storms where a single wrong move could bury a man alive. His hands moved over the controls with practiced ease, his body responding to threats before his mind had time to process them. Behind him, the other cadets moved as if they were extensions of their ships, their Deathworld reflexes allowing them to navigate dangers that would have overwhelmed pilots from safer worlds. The Morthok fleet's bioships responded with the kind of methodical precision that had sustained their siege for over a century. Acid cannons swiveled to track the incoming fighters, their organic targeting systems calculating intercept courses with mathematical accuracy. The alien weapons were designed to destroy large vessels, not small fighters, but there were so many of them that simple volume of fire should have been enough to stop the attack. But the humans were not flying like any enemy the Morthok had faced before. They did not maintain formation, they did not follow predictable attack patterns, and they certainly did not show the cautious respect for their own lives that characterized civilized warfare. They flew like maniacs, pulling turns that should have killed them, diving into concentrations of fire that should have vaporized them, and somehow surviving through pure audacity and skill. In the command center, the alien defenders watched in stunned silence as the tactical display showed impossible maneuvers. The human fighters were pulling gravitational forces that should have crushed their pilots, executing turns that violated every principle of safe flight operations. The display showed G-forces that would have reduced most galactic species to paste, but the humans seemed to thrive on the punishment. How are they surviving that? Lieutenant Kix asked, his four eyes wide with disbelief. Those acceleration forces would kill an Althorian in seconds. Commander Torres watched the display with growing amazement. "They grew up in gravity wells," he said quietly. "Earth has twice the gravity of most inhabited worlds. Their bodies are built for punishment that would destroy us." Cadet Rivers, her fighter streaming plasma fire from a glancing hit, targeted the bioship command nodes with the precision of a Europa ice hunter tracking her prey through a blizzard. Her ship dove through a wall of enemy fire, its hull glowing cherry red from the heat. But she held her course with the kind of determination that came from a species that had learned to hunt in the most hostile environments imaginable around her. The other cadets worked with the kind of wordless coordination that came from a species that had learned to hunt in packs. They communicated through subtle changes in flight patterns, anticipating each other's moves with an intuition that had been honed by millions of years of evolution. They moved like wolves, like sharks, like the apex predators they had always been. The Morthic fleet, faced with an enemy that operated outside their understanding of warfare, began to falter. Their bioships had been evolved for siege warfare, designed to maintain formation and pour fire into static targets. They could not adapt quickly enough to counter the humans' aggressive tactics, could not process the sheer audacity of an attack that ignored every principle of self-preservation. Cadet Knox, his fighter weaving through enemy fire like a Venus predator hunting in an acid storm, identified the Alpha bioship at the center of the formation. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of his fighter, its hull pulsing with the bioluminescent patterns that marked it as a command vessel. Organic weapons turrets tracked his approach, but he was already moving before they could fire. He dove under the creature's belly, his fighter's weapon system locking onto the neural clusters that controlled the bioship's higher functions. The alien vessel twisted to follow him, but it was too large, too slow, designed for the patient warfare of siege, not the lightning-fast combat that humans had perfected. Knox's missiles found their target, punching through the bioship's thick hide and detonating inside its nerve center. The massive creature convulsed, its bioluminescent patterns flickering and dying as its brain shut down. Without its guiding intelligence, the bioship began to drift, its weapons falling silent. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out, as the human cadets systematically eliminated the command vessels that held the Morthic formation together. They did not try to destroy every enemy ship. That would have been impossible. Instead, they targeted the Alphas, the leaders, the vessels that gave orders to the rest of the fleet. The Morthic bioships, deprived of their command structure, began to panic. They had been bred for pack warfare, trained to follow orders without question, and now they found themselves alone in a hostile environment with no guidance. Some tried to maintain formation, others fled toward the outer system, and still others turned on each other in confusion. Lewis, his fighter now scarred by dozens of near misses, watched the enemy formation collapse with the satisfaction of a predator who had successfully brought down prey much larger than himself. The plan was working, but they were not finished yet. The humans had broken the enemy's command structure, but they still had to survive long enough to return to base. "All units, begin withdrawal," Lewis broadcast on the tactical channel. "Mission accomplished. Let's go home." The human fighters began their return journey, but they did not flee in panic like a defeated force. They withdrew in good order, covering each other's retreat with the same coordination they had shown during the attack. They had accomplished something that the galaxy's finest military minds had considered impossible, and they had done it with the casual efficiency of a species that had learned to kill as easily as breathing. As the last human fighter disappeared into the hangar bays of Valdris Prime, the Morthic fleet continued its dissolution. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for over a century now scattered like frightened animals, their crews confused and leaderless. The siege that had lasted for 103 years was over, ended in 20 minutes by 200 cadets who had never learned that some battles could not be won. The alien defenders stood in shocked silence, staring at tactical displays that showed empty space where the siege fleet had maintained position for over a century. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare, about courage, and about the species that called themselves human. The Deathworlders had reminded the galaxy why they were feared. At exactly 820 hours, ship time, the last Morthic command vessel died in a brilliant burst of bioelectrical discharge that lit up the darkness of space like a dying star. The massive creature writhed in its death throes, its bioluminescent patterns flickering wildly before fading to the dull gray of lifeless tissue. Around it, the remaining ships of the siege fleet scattered like startled fish, their crews panicking as they realized their century-long mission had ended in catastrophic failure. The alien defenders of Valdres Prime stood in shocked silence, as the tactical displays showed readings that their computers insisted were impossible. Empty space stretched where the siege fleet had maintained position for over a century, broken only by the drifting hulks of destroyed command vessels and the fleeing shapes of leaderless bioships. 200 cadets had just eliminated a fleet of 400 warships with casualties so minimal that the station's medical bay had more beds than patients. Commander Torres found himself staring at the tactical display with the expression of a man who had witnessed a miracle. For over a century, the finest military minds in the galaxy had studied the Morthic siege, analyzing every possible strategy, every conceivable tactic, every theoretical solution. They had concluded that the siege was unbreakable, that the only options were surrender or slow extinction. And then 200 human children had proven them all wrong. In the aftermath, as the surviving human fighters returned to base, their ships scarred by enemy fire but still flying, the galaxy began to reassess its understanding of the species from Earth. The returning cadets seemed almost casual about their achievement, their voices calm and professional as they reported their status to the control tower. They had approached the siege not as a complex military problem requiring years of study, but as a simple survival scenario that demanded immediate action. "Control, this is Lewis," came the voice of the cadet who had led the assault. "All fighters accounted for. Mission accomplished. Request permission to land." The traffic controller, a veteran Caltharan who had been coordinating flights for 30 years, found himself unable to speak for several seconds. Finally, he managed to croak out clearance for landing, his voice thick with emotions he could not name. The cadets themselves seemed genuinely puzzled by the reaction their victory had generated. As they climbed out of their battered fighters, they displayed none of the triumphant celebration that might have been expected from warriors who had just achieved the impossible. Instead, they moved with the calm efficiency of professionals who had simply completed another training exercise. "I do not understand," Lieutenant Kix said to Commander Torres as they watched the humans secure their aircraft. "They have just accomplished the greatest military victory in recorded history, and they act as if it were routine. How can they be so calm?" Torres studied the young humans as they went through their post-flight checks, their movements precise and methodical despite the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. "Because to them it was routine," he said slowly. "They saw a problem, they identified a solution, and they executed it. The idea of maintaining a century-long siege is incomprehensible to them. They are not programmed for patience, they are programmed for results." The strategic implications of the victory began to sink in as reports flooded in from across the system. The Morthic fleet was in full retreat, their bioships fleeing toward the outer reaches of the galaxy with the desperate speed of creatures that had suddenly remembered what it felt like to be prey. The siege of Valdres Prime had not simply been broken. It had been obliterated so thoroughly that the enemy would never dare to return. General Vorth, the Keltharan commander who had initially dismissed the human plan as madness, stood before the tactical display with the expression of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered. "In 103 years of siege warfare," he said quietly, "we lost over 2 million defenders. The humans accomplished in 20 minutes what we could not accomplish in a century, and they did it with casualties that can be counted on the fingers of one hand." As news of the victory spread through the galaxy, military academies across hundreds of worlds began requesting human instructors. The species that had once been dismissed as barbaric Deathworlders had demonstrated something that the galaxy's more civilized races had forgotten, that sometimes the most effective solution to a problem was not to endure it, but to destroy it completely. The human cadets, meanwhile, had returned to their temporary quarters and were already preparing for their next assignment. They studied their tactical manuals with the same intensity they had shown during the battle, analyzing their performance and identifying areas for improvement. To them, The destruction of the Morthic fleet was not the end of their story, it was simply the beginning. Cadet Rivers, whose fighter had taken the most damage during the assault, sat in the station's repair bay watching the engineers work on her ship. The alien technicians moved with careful precision, their training focused on safety and proper procedure. They were skilled professionals, but they worked slowly, methodically, the way civilized beings approached dangerous tasks. "How do you do it?" asked one of the Althorian engineers, his forearms pausing in their work. "How do you make decisions so quickly, act so decisively?" "My people would have spent months analyzing the situation, considering every possible outcome, weighing the risks." Rivers smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded the engineer that humans came from a world where hesitation meant death. "We learned that the universe does not care about our safety," she said simply. "It does not give us time to think, time to plan, time to be afraid. It gives us problems that need solving, and we solve them." The psychological impact of the human victory extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Across the galaxy, species that had been fighting defensive wars for generations began to reconsider their strategies. The humans had shown that aggressive action, properly executed, could accomplish more in minutes than defensive measures could achieve in decades. The Morthic Empire, faced with the sudden realization that their siege warfare was no longer invincible, began to reassess their entire military doctrine. They had built their civilization on the principle of slow, methodical conquest, wearing down their enemies through patience and persistence. The humans had shown them that patience could be a weakness, that there were species in the galaxy that would not be worn down, would not be outlasted, would not surrender. The cadets prepared to leave Valdris Prime the next day, their mission complete and their next assignment waiting. They had saved 50,000 lives, ended a century-long siege, and changed the course of galactic history. To them, it had been a successful training exercise. To the galaxy, it had been a revelation. As their transport ship prepared for departure, Commander Torres stood in the hangar bay watching the humans board their vessel. They moved with the same casual confidence they had shown from the moment they arrived, unimpressed by the magnitude of their achievement. They had reminded the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics, it was their fundamental inability to accept that some problems could not be solved with sufficient application of violence and creativity. The transport ship lifted off, carrying the human cadets back to their academy and their studies. Behind them, they left a station full of alien defenders who would never again underestimate the species from Earth. The siege of Valdris Prime had ended not with the whimper of exhausted defenders, but with the roar of hunters who had never learned that some prey was too dangerous to attack. In the end, the galaxy learned what every predator on Earth had discovered over millions of years. Sometimes, the prey fights back, and when it does, it fights to win.